Good afternoon, and thank you all for coming. Welcome. My name is Ayanna Sanders, and I'm one of the class marshals for the graduating class of 2022. And on behalf of the class marshals, we did it. On behalf of the class marshals, I would like to welcome you to the last and final installment of the last lecture series. Thank you all for coming. It's so beautiful to see all of your faces for the past 2 weeks. The last lecture series presents an opportunity for select faculty members to provide guidance and to impart final words of wisdom on the graduating class. Last week, we kicked off the series hearing from Professors Jon Hanson and Brady. Yesterday, we heard from Professor Nikolas Bowie. And today, we will close the lecture series with the wonderful Professor Stephanie Robinson. Before we begin, I would like to remind you that the lecture is being recorded and that there's food in the back of the room. We also have forks, so if you did not grab one, please go grab one. Now it is my honor to introduce Professor Stephanie Robinson. Stephanie Robinson is the lecturer on law at Harvard Law School. She's a national media figure, author, former chief counsel to Senator Edward M. Kennedy, and the former president and CEO of the Jamestown Project, a national think tank focusing on democracy. Ms. Robinson is a nationally recognized expert on issues relating to social policy, women, race, family, and electoral politics. She was featured as one of the 30 young leaders of the future in Ebony magazine. It was profiled in the book As I Am, Young African-American Women in a Critical Age by Julian Okwu. She is a frequent speaker expressing her views in countless media outlets, including the Associated Press, the Washington Post, C-SPAN, NPR, and Fox News. Ms. Robinson, a magna cum laude graduate of the University of Maryland and the Harvard Law School that we all attend, is a native of Steubenville, Ohio. She lives in Massachusetts with her husband and 2 sons. She, along with Harvard Law professor and husband Ronald Sullivan Jr., are the first African-American faculty deans in the history of Harvard University. It is without further ado that we introduce Professor Stephanie Robinson for the last installment of our last lecture series. Thank you.
Thank you. Yep. Well, I mean, I like that. Let's just keep on clapping. Why don't we just keep on clapping? That's how we're here. That's how we should do it, really and truly. We should be celebrating you guys. You know, it's 2022 and you are still standing upright and not horizontal, which is a great feat in these times that we find ourselves in. I want to first thank Ayanna for that very kind introduction. I want to thank all of you for inviting me here to be able to participate in this last lecture series. You know, I've been musing, and I've been doing it with some of my students. I was like, oh my gosh, I am the last lecturer at the last lecture of the last lecture series. I was like, that's pretty cool. So I am excited. Good afternoon, everyone. It is truly an honor and a privilege for me to be able to speak to you today at this special moment. And it really is a transition into the next series of special moments that you will have, that we will do some of them together, but most of them, you will be choosing what you want to do in your next transition. So I want to thank the class marshals, because that would be rude if I didn't, for sponsoring this series. And I liked what Ayanna said, sort of giving a little bit of background on the series. But each year, this last lecture series gives an opportunity to those of us who have dedicated our careers to teaching and inspiring others with this golden opportunity to be able to speak to you, to be able to honor you, to be able to celebrate you, and to hopefully be able to inspire you just one last time. We'll see how that goes. I also want to thank you all for the support that you've given to the law school, to its mission, to its administration, and perhaps even most importantly to this collective community. We can all just breathe. It's been tough. These last 2 years have been really tough. And I have seen you individually and collectively just show so much patience and kindness and mercy and grace and perseverance. And I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge what you guys have done and how I think that it has built on this community that I so love, the law school, as an alum of this fine institution. Now, I'm going to take some time, and hopefully not too much time, to offer you, the class of 2022, some parting words. Now, these parting words are concerning the exciting and fast approaching milestone that we are here to begin to celebrate today. And while these thoughts really do acknowledge the remarkable achievement of you ultimately earning your degree from this preeminent institution of scholarship and learning, they really speak more to celebrating what I call life's beauty, and perhaps even more to celebrating the life within you. So allow me to explain, and I want to do this really quickly before I jump into my main point. Well, your families and you soon will be celebrating, as you should, your accomplishments. I also want you just to take a moment just to reflect upon the significance of your accomplishments. How you have come to the place that you are in, but I want you to look beyond the academy. When you do, I hope that you will just sit still for a moment and sit quietly and listen. Not necessarily to me, but I want you to listen to your heart. Listen to your spirit. Listen to that still small voice inside of you. And be totally honest with yourself. Honest with yourself about what passion your inner voice is offering. And then maybe you can grasp, or you may be able to come to grips with what it means and how you are going to ensure that it's expressed as you move forward in life. Now, that may sound a little mushy, and I don't want you to get it twisted. I don't want you to think that I am going down some path of telling you not to continue down the trajectory that you currently are on. I'm clearly not doing that. So for those of you who have that 6 or 7 figure offer on the table from Elon Musk, please do not even listen to me. You need to do what you need to do. I understand that. But what I'm actually saying, guys, is whatever you decide to do, make sure there's always room for you to pursue something that you are passionate about. Hopefully within, or at least alongside your career. Something that truly invigorates your living, something that makes you feel like you are truly alive. Indeed, as the great James Baldwin remarked, the purpose of education is not to make a living, but make a life. And I say that life should be more than a mere chore, something that you're trying to get through or get by. It should be one ongoing and present moment of experience, of passion, and of growth. And as you're approaching this commencement, right around the corner, you all know already, it is not the end of anything. It is actually the beginning of you going forward. And I want to implore upon you that life is worth living, and you live your life in moments. You don't live your life in goals. So make sure that the moments in each day, that it's not a chore, that you're not doing it to get from place A to place B, but you're doing it because it pumps your engine, it moves you, it invigorates you. It causes you to be who you are. So, all right, all of that said, now it's time for you, the unforgettable class of 2022. So I want you to get out your surfboards because we are about to hang 10. Okay, so y'all know I'm a surfer. We are about to hang 10 here. Okay, but maybe not literally, but just roll with me for a minute here. It'll make sense. The chosen theme of my talk today is surfing the storm, the art of hanging 10 in a hurricane. Surfing the storm, the art of hanging 10 in a hurricane. And you don't have to actually order or even borrow or 3D print a surfboard because for the purposes of this talk, you are the surfboards. Keep hanging 10 with me. I promise in the end, this is all going to make beautiful sense. Now, I'm going to break today's talk down into 3 parts. My first part is going to be how such storms, particularly the current storm that we find ourselves in, can affect us personally and even make us wish that we weren't alive. It can make us wish that we lived in some other time, an era that was less difficult, different. The second part of my talk is how such storms are inherent, necessary, and even a redemptive part of our chosen field, which of course is law for everybody who's in here today. And finally, the third part of my talk. As you move forward in life and your career, how these storms can ultimately bring you blessings between the raindrops, okay? So let's go ahead and go surfing. Now, surfing the storm is obviously a metaphor. What it speaks to for me is to our God-given capacity, if we choose to tap into it, to effectively navigate the personal or collective storms we face in our lives, be they monetary, be they medical, relational, or most recently, as we collectively have faced, global. Especially in our current uncertain times, yes, even dangerous times, it might be easy for us to get caught up in all the daily drama of it all, engulfing us, that we forget about who we are and why we are actually here. And despite what is going on in the world, we are still human beings. We still love, we still laugh, we still smile, we are still receiving knowledge to better ourselves and to serve those who are around us. So regardless of these storms that are swirling about us, this has not changed. Who we are has not changed. And recognizing this, in my opinion, is the first step on your path to surfing the storm. So I want you to visualize with me. Visualize the eye of a hurricane, that calm part of the center of utter chaos, where there is sunshine, where there is peace, where there's clarity. Now, in good times, it's easy. It's easy to maintain this peaceful perspective. But what about times like now? I mean, what about these times when we're feeling depressed, when we're not feeling okay, when we're feeling threatened and we're feeling pressured? What about times like now, when it's so easy to just give in to fear? In this type of precarious and volatile environment with the stakes being so high, it would be easy for us to wish that we had been born at another time, in another era, or one less threatening, or one a little bit more stable than the current one that we find ourselves in. But I'm going to tell you, I reject and I discourage such a destructive and disempowering line of thought. For I believe that our current era to be an extraordinary and opportune time to be alive. I believe if we are tuned in, spiritually fluid, and truly paying attention, that we are right where we need to be, in the proverbial eye of the storm, with the capacity to see through the distractions, the threats that are projected fears that are just swirling all about us. I clearly believe that uncertainty and chaos can breed clarity and peace. Now, as human beings, what do we like to do? We like to vent, we like to cry, we like to yell, we like to talk about and complain about how we need to change. There needs to be some sort of change that is happening right now. So question, since when in this country and its democratic evolution has substantial change or significant change ever come easy? Now, if you guys know something, I mean, I see Kareem out there, I'm telling you, if you know something that I don't, please inform me of my ignorance. Because as a woman and an African American woman, I'm sorry, Randy Kennedy, I definitely do not remember getting that memo. And I can guarantee you that the incoming Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson didn't get it either. She knows a little something now about storms. But you see, my obvious point is that social transformation of any kind is often jarring, it's tumultuous, it's stressful, it's messy, and it can be a very violent process. It seldom, if ever, comes wrapped in that beautiful little blue box with the white ribbon on it at the top for us to take. So this acknowledged maybe we are right where we need to be. I mean, allow me to take that step, or at least that thought a step further. Maybe we are right where we are supposed to be. And I would say this even if you don't agree with me on a personal level, which many of you may not. I'm looking at your faces. But isn't our profession one of service, especially in times like now? I mean, throughout our nation's history, haven't we been the ones who have been at the eye of the storm, or at least called in at some of its most epic moments? We've been called in to set things straight, to set it right, or to put regulatory structures and legal frameworks in place that previously did not exist. The Articles of Confederation, the Constitution, the amendments. Any of that ring a bell? I would say that last time I checked, these documents were not forged in eras of ease or eras of serenity, but rather in decades of conflict and turmoil, of change, of difficult, alarming, uncertain, violent, tumultuous, triumphant, necessary, beautiful, and unpredictable change. So again, maybe we are not only right where we need to be, storm chasers that we are, but we are right where we are supposed to be, tracking the winds of change, finding the eye of the storm, surfing that storm. Maybe. So, in law, we face storms all the time. In fact, the law is largely formed to handle and adjudicate the fallout of such storms. There's a reason, right, why we call it a trial. The reason is that a trial is a process, one that sometimes is difficult, contestatory, adversarial, but it's a process nonetheless to lead to an end, and hopefully a just end. In the broader sense, trials represent the very storms that have helped forge or heavily influenced who we are as a nation. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the following an exemplary Revolutionary era account that I'm about to give, but I think that it bears repeating. So here you go. In March of 1770, 3 weeks after the Boston Massacre, a grand jury indicted a British 29th Regiment captain and 8 of his soldiers on charges of murder. If found guilty, they would likely face the death penalty for their part in the massacre. Now, given that they were considered terrorists at the time, no lawyer, nobody, wanted to represent these reviled soldiers. Step in, 35-year-old Jon Adams. He comes to their legal defense. Now, this was a bold move, especially given the difficult times and his already promising career path. Passions were running high, mob violence was a common occurrence. Adams risked his career, he risked his professional reputation, he risked his income, but nonetheless, he was committed to the ideals of a fair trial and equal justice. Adams even risked the safety of his family, his young children, and his wife, given this rampant mob violence that was visited upon anyone who was associated with whom the public considered to be a British terrorist. Now, in one of many attempts by the colonists to further stoke public enmity against the British defendants, you had Paul Revere. Paul Revere rendered this engraving of the Boston Massacre that contained such sensational images of the British soldiers firing all over on the crowd. And this hastily done and later found inaccurate depiction. But this image was published in the Boston Gazette, and it was distributed widely, garnering a whole lot of pre-trial outrage. Adams, he found himself in quite the revolutionary storm, with vehement opposition, public disfavor, and media bias just swirling all around him. And I tell you, if Twitter had existed way back then, well, I fear that President Adams would have been canceled long before he took that oath of office. But I digress. The cancel culture is a whole nother topic that we can talk about later. Within this daunting environment, though, Adams defended the British captain, Thomas Preston, against murder charges in what turned out to be a 6-day trial in late October of 1770. Preston pled not guilty, but he didn't testify. The prosecution called 15 witnesses to prove that Preston and his soldiers had actually shot and killed the people in the crowd. The defense relied on 23 witness testimonials, saying that, nope, wrong. Soldiers were provoked by this crowd. Now, after a very lengthy deliberation, the jury acquitted Preston on the basis of what? Anybody remember? Reasonable doubt, right? This was the very first time that a judge had actually used this phrase. And it ushered in what is now a lasting principle in criminal law. So the jury ultimately acquitted 6 of the British soldiers as well. The other 2 were found guilty of manslaughter, but not murder. So they all escaped the death penalty. Now, these trials are now known as the Boston Massacre trials, cemented Adams's reputation as one of the top attorneys in this state of Massachusetts. 3 months later, he was elected to the Massachusetts House of Representatives, and a quarter century later, with still no Twitter, he was elected the 2nd president of these United States of America. So upon recounting his historic trial victory, Adams eloquently revealed how his personal fears and his democratic passions competed to produce the extraordinary verdict. And he offered this. He said, "The part one took in defense of Captain Preston and soldiers procured me anxiety and obloquy enough. It was, however, one of the most gallant, generous, manly, and disinterested actions of my whole life, and one of the best pieces of service I ever rendered my country. Judgment of death against those soldiers would have been as foul a stain upon this country as the executions of the Quakers or witches anciently. As the evidence was, the verdict of the jury was exactly right." So Adams had been bold enough in the face of the ruinous and threatening storm to stand upon legal principle within its very center and employ the law in an equitable, appropriate, and indelible manner. Adams did not become the storm. Rather, he centered himself on legal principle within its calm, clear eye, which is a powerful vantage point that enabled his clarity despite the howling winds surrounding him. Now, obviously, the implications of his actions remain with us to this very day. A little less than a century later, with the Dred Scott decision in 1857, Supreme Court Chief Justice Roger B. Taney famously declared that black people had no rights which the white man was bound to respect. Certainly not our finest hour or moment in our nation's history. But keep hanging with me. Hang in 10. I'm getting to the point. You see, Scott, he had first filed this lawsuit in Missouri, where he was formerly held in bondage, 11 years prior to the infamous verdict, which would further catalyze the Civil War. And it would go on down in history as one of the worst Supreme Court decisions ever made. But while we all know of this historic and unfortunate decision, many of us are just coming to know, and quite frankly, many of us don't know yet, that such freedom suits were far from rare. In fact, between the early 1790s and the Dred Scott decision in 1857, tens of thousands of freedom suits were filed by enslaved people across the Union. And I really, that was not a typo or anything. I said tens of thousands. How's that for a storm? And by the way, if you care, a substantial number of those suits were successful. Now, I find it curious. I'll use that word. I can use funny, I can use strange, but I'll just say curious. I find it curious how we were never told about this part of American history. We were never taught this in schools. That a substantial number of enslaved black folks sued for their freedom from slavery. They used the law, they sued, and not only did they sue, they won. All we hear about is Dred Scott. But the storm. You see, the storm was swirling long before that pivotal decision. And many enslaved people and their lawyers were employing this little thing called the law as a means of making their way through the storms, racking their lives and threatening their very beings. Such an omission, it becomes even more glaring, even more difficult to swallow when you realize that many of history's legendary figures and entities played long and intimate legal roles in these freedom suits, including the likes of Philip Barton Key, Francis Scott Key, Chief Justice John Marshall, Justice Samuel Chase, Georgetown University, the Jesuit Order, just to name a few. So I think it's fascinating. It's a fascinating and substantial chapter in American history that we should all know more about. We should acknowledge how, once again, the law and its representatives provided a means of making our way as a country through the storm of enslavement, through the storm of denial of citizenship, through the storm of racial inequity. We should know more about that. And we should investigate. Okay, so I've talked to you a little bit about history and our storms, our collective storms and individual storms. So let's move to get to a more modern and unique take on this storm metaphor. One offered by another Harvard alum who has made quite an impact on our justice system and our collective American legal system and consciousness. Now, as most of you know, attorney Bryan Stevenson is the founder and executive director of the Equal Justice Initiative in Montgomery, Alabama. He has worked tirelessly on behalf of poor folks, on behalf of folks of color, and in one of the most difficult areas of the law, capital punishment cases. And of course, in 2019, Stevenson's best-selling book, Just Mercy, A Story of Justice and Redemption, was adapted and released as a major motion picture starring none other than Michael B. Jordan. And I say that because I mentioned that he has an impact on our American legal conscience. I would offer that he has an impact, as many of you will, on the public and American conscious, period. So, in November of 2021, Stevenson was interviewed, and he was interviewed for this podcast On Point, or On Being, and Krista Tippett did the interview. And what he does is he talks about the day that he opened his lynching memorial in Montgomery, Alabama. It's now known as the National Memorial for Peace and Justice. It commemorates, as we know, black victims of lynching in the United States. So on that day, he says, though nervous, Stevenson ultimately and quite literally sought solace in the threatening storm. So let me talk to you a little bit more about that. I'm going to read to you the transcript of Stevenson's interview. And it speaks not necessarily to the law, but to a more general concept of justice and reconciliation. So he says, when we opened the memorial in 2018, it was just such a surreal experience to have 25,000 people come to Montgomery to see these spaces that we had created. And I wanted everything to be just perfect. We had all of these great thinkers and these civil rights activists and all of these performers and people who were coming to perform. And on that morning of the dedication at the memorial, it looked like it was going to rain. And I've been just terrified at the idea that it was going to rain and mess up this entire experience. I was so worried about it, and the clouds were just getting darker and darker and darker. And just as I was getting ready to stand up to speak, the clouds just opened up. And all of a sudden, it was a downpour. And this thing that I had been dreading all of a sudden became something completely different. As I was listening to these raindrops hit the top of the memorial and looking up at all of these monuments which were dedicated to lynching victims, and all of a sudden, I had this awareness that this wasn't something that I should fear, that this wasn't something that I should dread. See, in that moment, it didn't sound like rain hitting the top of the memorial. It sounded like tears being shed by the thousands of black people whose lives have never been honored, whose names have never been mentioned. And it sounded like they were shedding tears of joy, that there was this moment of reckoning. And that's the gift. That's the gift I think I've been given by this legacy, by this ancestry that celebrates struggling for justice, that honors struggling for justice. And I hold on to that, I do. And it sustains me in times when I need it. It absolutely compels me to keep doing as much as I possibly can. Just poignant and powerful words by Brian Stevenson. So I come back and say, maybe, regardless of how tragic or how horrible the storms we face may be or may feel, it's really all about our perspective and how we choose to look at it, to reconcile it, to surf it for its many lessons. And again, maybe, just maybe, us being right here, right now, at a time where our democracy, our system of law, our society, our environment, and yes, our very survival as a species is being threatened. Maybe this too is actually a gift. So maybe we are the ones best fit and most committed to holding America to its democratic principles, to seeing our way through the storms, to setting this whole thing right again. And maybe lawyers like John Adams and like Brian Stevenson and like Ketanji Brown Jackson and like us will be the ones to employ our tools, our training, and our ethics to maintain our position at the clear center of the tempest, at its democratic singularity. And in doing so, we save ourselves from ourselves once more. Now, I have a friend. I actually have a lot of friends, not just one. But I have a friend who is a writer. And he once wrote this poem where one of the lines is, sometimes we curse the heavens through blessed raindrops. It speaks to how our blessings are delivered to us in ways we commonly miss because they may arrive in the midst of rain, in ways we didn't see coming or that we didn't expect at all. So I said, well, instead of wondering why me and why now, maybe we should just focus on our personal and our professional growth so that we can adopt a perspective conducive to seeing clearly through the raging storm. That we can produce an outlook that recognizes our own God-given capacities for both self-transformation and for collective change. For we can't go out and change the world around us without changing ourselves. And you know that Calvary that you've been waiting for, that you are like, when are they coming to save us? Well, I'm going to tell you, every morning that you get up and you look in the mirror and brush your teeth, you're looking right at that Calvary. And in this very room, we possess the necessary tools and the capacities to transform ourselves and simultaneously the world around us with an unyielding commitment to a greater purpose, to a democratic principle, to an active comprehension of a living, breathing Constitution. Yes, it is people like you before me who will carry the torch forward by operationalizing the foundational law of our land to ensure it won't be regarded as some static historical document for museum exhibit, but a functional and living source of human progress, social justice, and enduring freedom. It is people like you before me who will ensure our cherished American democracy remains a cherished American democracy through democratic expansion rather than fascist contraction or imperial domination, an authentic expansion that further incorporates the full democratic participation of traditionally marginalized or oppressed American communities. It is people like you before me who will see through the storm with a humanistic legal lens to push toward just, ethical, and inclusive rainbow on the other side, the one that a king once told us about, the one that the long arc of the moral universe bends towards. It is people like you before me who will ultimately transform our society for the better, recognizing the many mistakes of our past while learning from them and forging a better future from the challenging yet blessed times that we currently find ourselves in. And I tell you, make no mistake about it. Make no mistake about it. Make no mistake about it. You have the power to do this. And to be quite honest, as I tell my students, those of you who I've taught, honestly, I expect nothing less from any of you. And if you don't already, I pray that you will expect nothing less from yourselves. Because we are the ones that we've been waiting for. So, I'm going to leave you. And I'm going to leave you with these words from Harlem Renaissance writer and poet, Jean Toomer. And they were written in 1923. It's a poem that's called Storm Ending. And in its brevity, it represents such powerful themes as growth, reconciliation, and new birth within the violent beauty of the tempest. Storm ending. Thunder blossoms gorgeously above our heads. Great hollow bell-like flowers rumbling in the wind, stretching clappers to strike our ears. Full-lipped flowers bitten by the sun. Bleeding rain, dripping rain like golden honey. And the sweet earth flying from the thunder. I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for your intellect. I want to thank you for your spirit and your heart, and I want to thank you for your commitment to justice and to change. I further want to thank each and every one of you for your present and your future contributions to our beloved field of law, and quite frankly, to the collective progress of the world, which is in so desperate need of each and every one of you right now. God bless you and thank you.